I know why you're here. You're writing a new adventure for your Dungeons & Dragons party that just reached level 5. And once again, they are encountering bandits or kobolds or goblins or whatever, and you're just sick of it. And more importantly, your players are sick of it. Everyone at your table is sick and tired of fighting the same old creatures with the same attacks and hit points and flavor. And if you have seen my other video about creating NPCs, you might be a little better off with all your NPCs at least having a bit of a backstory, but we can still do better. So today, let's talk about making interesting and unique enemies for your D&D combats. And more specifically, we will be discussing making a variety of enemies and enemy types with only using one stat block. Alright, let's get into things. So, when we are talking about true variety between enemies in D&D combat, we are talking about having multiple different types of creatures, all with different stat blocks. And this could mean a goblin encampment that has goblins, hobgoblins, and wargs all working against your party at the same time. Or it can mean city guards and guard captains and mastiffs all in the same combat. And that is what I like to call true variety. It is when you have a bunch of different creatures that all have different combat abilities and different stat blocks all working in unison together. And any combat that involves wholly different creatures that the party is fighting at the same time is a pretty great combat. I mean, if you do this, you're pretty much already done. Having 3 to 4 different enemy stat blocks in a combat is perfectly fine. And if you can manage that for every single combat and every single session, your players are never going to get bored with your combats. But if you're in a situation where you may have multiple of the same enemy type fighting the party, then we have to resort to artificial variety, which isn't really a bad thing. I actually like using this a lot. Adding artificial variety helps in loads of ways that I'm definitely going to discuss later. But for now, what you need to know is that artificial variety in D&D combat is when you have multiple enemies using the same stat block, and you create differences in these enemies by rolling for hit points, or changing their types of weapon, or even adding abilities that will let them stand out amongst other NPCs that are essentially the same as them. Now, let me just go into a bit more detail. For example, let's say that we have a combat where we have the party going against a bandit crew consisting of a captain named Fernando and his 2 lackeys, John and Jeremy. Obviously, Fernando is going to be a bandit captain, so he is all set to go with a normal stat block. If you would like to adjust it or roll for hit points or do whatever you want, that is fine. But it is not necessary for adding variety. You can just do it if you want to spruce up your enemy in any sort of way. But John and Jeremy are just both normal bandits. So we need to add a bit of artificial variety in order to spice up this combat and not have 2 of the same people fighting the party at the same time. That's boring. We can start off this spicing up of things with hit points. And it's as easy as just rolling the hit points that the stat block suggests. And you can do that super quickly. John has rolled 12 hit points, and Jeremy has rolled 8 hit points. And right here, we already have a big difference. Basically, John is a much sturdier bandit. He has large muscles and plenty of scars to boast his constitution. Whereas Jeremy is a lot less physically intimidating and seems to stand behind John and Fernando for most of the time. After hit points, we can now think about the weapons these characters might use. Because honestly, there is a reason that most NPCs are given a ranged and a melee option. And it's because of artificial variety. Having a mix of ranged and melee combatants does wonders for your combat, adding loads of layers for players to strategize about. And it doesn't stop at just choosing which of the preset weapons you want your enemies to use. At any point, you could switch out a longsword for a polearm or a crossbow for a bow. It's up to you. I mean, D&D weapons are kind of boring anyway. They all do about the same amount of damage at the end of the day. So do whatever you want to do for flavor and do whatever makes sense for your story. And going back to our example, due to his brawn, Jon will surely stick to the front lines, protecting Fernando at all times using a melee weapon. Well, Jeremy is probably going to stick to the back lines, and he's going to take pop shots at the enemies from afar. Finally, with the cherry on top, we can now give our NPCs some special traits to help them stand out during combat. And these traits can be anything from class abilities to feats, to battle master maneuvers, to even some spells. You can even give your enemies a magic item or two. It really doesn't matter. Do anything that will make them pop out to your players. And be sure to make whatever changes you need to feel that it is fitting your story the way that you want it to. For Jon, I think the answer is pretty simple. His job is to be Fernando's right-hand man and bodyguard, so he is going to be sticking to his side at all times and keeping enemies at bay. So of course, he will have the Sentinel feat, allowing him to hit a creature with an opportunity attack that causes that creature's speed to become 0 for the rest of the turn, along with causing creatures to provoke opportunity attacks from him even if they take the disengage action before leaving his reach. And finally, when a creature makes an attack against a target other than Jon, he can use his reaction to make a melee attack at that creature. Then, for Jeremy, in order to keep him relevant in the combat and to allow him to remain a thorn in the party's side, he will be given the Rogue's Cunning action ability, which allows him to use his quick thinking and agility to move around and act quickly. He can take a bonus action on each of his turns in combat, and this action can be used to dash, disengage, or hide. And with that, we now have a pretty diverse crew for our party to deal with. And as a final touch, we'll give them a bit of a story. Fernando, he always wanted to be a rich man. He worked hard for a very long time, working under the boots of many different men. He often dreamed of being given a true chance to prove himself and earn his way into riches. But his chance never came. And eventually he was fed up with working under others and decided to go into business for himself, giving him his own chance. But the business he adopted wasn't one that he knew. No, he no longer wanted to work. He instead planned to take the wealth he believed was his own back from the men who employed him and exploited him his entire life. And so he did just that. He robbed each of his former employees one by one and became the rich man he always wanted to be. But he just couldn't stop getting richer. He felt he could expand the operation, and so he hired some of his former co-workers. These people are Jon and Jeremy, and he saw potential in them. Both Jon and Jeremy admired him and believed that Fernando was doing what was right, and when he asked them to jump, their only response was how high. Now the three of them have robbed every single major business in the city in some fashion and have landed themselves quite the bounty. The only question now is who of the bounty hunters in the city will be able to find them first. Thank you all for watching yet another video of mine. I hope this one was as concise and helpful as I always strive to be. And if you're new here, please consider going back and watching my older videos. My latest one was about getting your players to spend some gold in D&D. And if you liked this video, please consider liking and even subscribing. Also, if you want to talk this video or talk D&D in general, please feel free to leave anything in the comments. I will gladly talk to you. And as always, have fun playing D&D.